All right. Well, let's have a look at what this is all about, perception. Now, many of you are part of the Sacred Self-Healing community for many, many years. So the word perception is no longer sort of a one-dimensional word for you anymore. You understand that there are many different levels of perception. And today we want to use those first 3 workshops where we talked about issues with awakening to dive a little deeper into what these issues are related to. Okay, so in these 3 workshops, 4 till 7, we will discuss the issues with perception and discernment of truth and reality. And for that purpose, we will begin to talk after we, sort of warmed up a bit and found out what we understand as perception. I'm going to talk about our senses, like what we are perceiving with, and on which of these different senses we primarily rely on, and what kind of different levels of perception they correspond with. We're going to talk a little bit about the mechanics of perception. I don't know how far we get with that. But what I really want you to drive home here in this first part is the link between our energetic state and perception. And with it also something that I'm introducing here in this lecture called vitality. All right, so our connection to life itself and what influences our perception, so that we can better pinpoint, well, really what it is that we need to do, what it is that we need to train, where maybe where we have disconnect or where we just simply need to pay more attention. So there's something, just to give you a real life example, that I always talk about with my parents at the school. I always make that little speech that you guys also know, which is everybody has a different primary channel, primary and secondary channel on which we perceive. Now, for kids, it's mostly, relating to their 5 senses, on which they, hear and see, and, how they explore their world, how they understand their world. And it's one of those things that are super, super important for us to know about ourselves as grown-ups. With kids, it's a little different. So there's a sort of a developmental progression in how our senses develop. But even though, there are certain things that we can't expect our kids to understand or to perceive, there still are some of these primary and secondary channels that we maintain throughout our lifetime. And whether or not a person then progresses, use more of their senses, refine and trains their senses, that mostly relates to their environment and their exposure. Okay, so the example is that I tell parents that are concerned about their children's ability, say, to learn how to read or write, or how to spell words, or how to comprehend writing, that they should not worry, but instead observe their own child and find out how they, or what channel of perception, what which of their senses they are relying on most. Now, and this is often news for parents. When I talk to you about this, you've already heard me say this in multiple different contexts. Like some of us are more visual than others. Some of us are more tactile. Yeah, we have to like experience things or touch things or, you know, sort of grasp them. Yeah, to retain them, to fully internalize them. And some of us are more auditory. Yeah, we respond well to hearing things, etc. And then we have the kinesthetics among us that also need to grasp things, but not perhaps through their actual touch, but through their entire body. So, just real quick here to double check with you. Are you guys all familiar with your primary channels? Have they maybe changed? Are you aware of what these primary channels of perception are for you that you rely on unconsciously? Unconsciously. It's not consciously, it's unconscious. It's really that formed in childhood. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, no, I'm visual kinesthetic.
Visual and kinesthetic.
Yeah.
Okay. Could you describe to all of us what this means and how you found out?
Probably found out when I was a kid, um, just in the sense that I was seeing a lot of things. It was because I was always told to kind of shut up. There was always not much of an expression for for listening, so
Mm.
it was more get what was going on around me to keep myself safe, you know. So I kind of and that took me into lots of kind of dark experiences of seeing things visually that typically you wouldn't consider that were here in 3D. So, and also in my dreams, the visuals in my dreams were very prominent as well, extremely so. Um,
So, what I hear you say is that you had to become a good energy reader to get a full grasp of what was going on around you. You would be observing mostly,
yeah,
which is the visual, and then the kinesthetic is to allow yourself to feel it on all levels, or at
yes,
least on that sort of like how it made you feel. It's more like a
yeah,
a sensation. Not we're not talking about spiritual perception here. We're talking about like how we try to understand our world. And
yes, yeah. It was so foreign. It was just it was how I had to manage what I was experiencing.
mhm.
Yeah.
Probably people also, I mean, you said there was not much room for self expression, but probably people also did not speak to you a lot or explain things to you a lot, like used their words, their language to allow you to grasp something through words and the
Correct.
meaning.
It was
Hmm.
just an explanation that I would understand because that was their world.
Hmm. By the way, it's not really clear whether we form these primary and secondary channels because of the environment and the exposure, or whether that's just part of our aptitude or maybe like a karmic disposition. There are statistics about this, and they do show that men are more visual than females. Okay, and that is being referred back to the original sort of say historically, the needs or the faculties that needed to be developed, such as eyesight for hunting and for watching and protecting the village, say. Whereas for females, that sense was not really what they primarily needed throughout the day. For them, for females in the old days, in sort of that classic sort of tribal kind of setting, it was more important to have a good tactile sense, and also being able to read other people's emotions, making out sort of relationship things and how to relate to things. So these are the only statistics that I know that explain certain specific aptitudes. So males have a tendency to be more visual than females. Females have a tendency to be more kinesthetic in their reliance on their channels, their perception channels. That said, it doesn't mean that all males and all females. That in your case, Jared, you said you visual kinesthetic, so you have an interesting mixture here. Yeah. Anybody else? What do you know about your primary channels, or what you primarily unconsciously rely on?
Mine is kinesthetic, tactile. I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't trust my eyesight, my sight, because
Mm-hmm.
what I actually saw in the world didn't match up with how I felt. So that was tricky, navigating, environments sometimes where what I saw and what I felt were two different things.
Very cool. Very cool that you can pinpoint this, Cindy. Like sort of why, or it's just a guess, right? But it's a pretty educated guess.
Yeah.
That
I felt
if,
crazy growing up,
mhm,
honestly.
yeah, if there's a lot of gaslighting or emotional manipulation going on in, say, like a family setting, yeah, or pretending, those kind of things. Um, we, like you said, we learn to not trust certain things and try to rely on other things. That's quite like a good guess.
Yeah.
So kinesthetic tactile, and kinesthetic tactile is very uh, typical, I want to say, for females. Yeah. So you experience, or you experience your world, you perceive your world through the feelings that are caused in you, which is the kinesthetic part, and also your body.
Yes.
Yeah, like how your body reacts to it. So you respond to, say things such as contraction, right? Feeling contracted within yourself
Yes.
very strongly, and maybe also then the positive, the expansion aspect, like when something feels free, when something feels, like basically the opposite of
Yes.
contraction. Hmm.
Yep, I trust that more than anything my eyes can show me.
Hmm. Any
Can
different,
you
and by the way, there is zero judgment in this. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Janet. Go ahead.
oh, can you hear me? This is Sheila.
Sheila, yeah, I
Okay,
hear you.
I'm sorry, I had to change my settings on this microphone still. Um, I was thinking the same like Jared with the like visual kinesthetic,
Hmm.
and similar to what he was talking about in terms of what I'm learning now about the difficulties from growing up and not talking with people, like the family not
Hmm.
talking. And so words didn't always match. So I was always watching for the visual cues of, is their behavior matching what's going
Ah,
on?
interesting.
And then I need to touch and feel stuff with my hands like that. And so I was constantly wanting to work on things, but matching with my eyes was really important. And then if I felt something inside that didn't match up with what I was seeing, it was very confusing and I didn't understand why.
Hmm. So visual kinesthetic. So you would listen to your eyes and you would look for some kind of pattern or something like a
Mm,
recognition, but you would
right,
also listen to the feeling that goes
right,
along with it. Your system is trying to match that up. It's
right.
trying to make
Yeah.
now. Just out of curiosity, since you brought in the matching up aspect, do you have any sort of conscious observation about what happens or what happened when you couldn't match it up?
Oh yeah, that's what I'm discovering is a lot of the underlying anxiety feelings that you start going, is it me? Is it this situation I'm seeing? What doesn't match?
Mm-hmm.
And then I spent a lot of energy trying to figure that out. And
Okay.
that's what I've discovered now. But that whole, something kind of like what I think Cindy just said, when you feel something in a certain way, but I'm looking out here and all of these pieces that I'm seeing aren't fitting, something's not right.
Mm-hmm.
then it starts to be, okay, is this something I need to adjust to, or is this something that everything that's going on out here actually isn't matching, and why, kind of stuff. But it's been as a grown up that I've actually even
Mm-hmm.
started to put this together, which makes sense to why stuff was pretty confusing as a young person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm,
I mean, again, there's no judgment in it, and there's no better or worse. But there is something very cool about becoming aware of this. So Cindy basically said that she couldn't trust any of what she saw, and just gave up on it, and started using her body as a sort of a compass. That could be something that, for example, you could take as an inspiration or as a prompt, to maybe do that and try if that can actually help you with that. If your body's responses to things, can help you with this discernment, like how does my body feel in that. I'm not saying that you have to. What I'm saying is to uh, feel inspired to perhaps use other senses. If it is like you say, that you spend a considerable amount of energy in trying to bridge that gap or somehow find a solution, then maybe the solution is just simply, trying different ways to discern.
mhm, mhm,
Yeah. So that's just a sort of a general kind of tip that I have. Yeah. So that sometimes it's something that I consciously did. I did not. I was completely disconnected with my body as a younger person. Okay. And I am now at a place where ever since I included my body, ever since I increased my body connection, I don't have these confusions anymore. Does that make sense? So it changed. The way I perceive people now is different because I use my, like my inner sort of cell memory, if you will, you know, in addition, to um, the other sort of, primary senses or primary channels that I have. Okay, go ahead, Janet. You've been raising your hand so patiently, and Mandy, I see your hand too.
Thank you.
Hi.
Good evening, everybody, and morning.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Can you hear me okay? Okay,
Yes.
I have a whole different, I actually have some internet. Anyway, um, I actually come to the question of like, I don't really think I know. Even though I could guess at it,
Okay.
my time that I go off of, I say, are dependent on the situation because it seems like I shut down a lot of my perceptions to override them with intellect and perhaps visual
Mm.
things, like pushing my vision into 3D so far. Every once in a while, there'd be the moments as a young person when I'm relaxed and that inner vision and everything. And it seems like I lived in that world a lot, but I think I also got lost in that world a lot.
Mm.
So, if that makes any sense, just because of the kind of dysfunction of how
Mm-hmm.
it didn't line up with going to school all the time or with what was going on in my family emotionally and then with me and how to deal with it. So that I guess the fake me took over so much that uh, I don't know what other than being good and using my vision and things like that, but to the standard of society.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, like what everybody else, like you've mentioned about yourself, has been it's been an unknotting from that place. to
it's quite
realign
possible.
myself.
Yeah, it's quite
Yeah,
possible that you just simply sort of got lost in any of them, and maybe there were times where you got lost in the sensory perception of your body, and then there were times where you got lost in your spiritual vision, and it's quite possible. This happened to me, and this happened to I know that from about some of you, happened to some of you as well. Yeah, so it's not always like sort of steady. Okay, but the problem with it is if we get lost in one particular place, is that our overall level of trust kind of diminishes, and then we get so confused that we don't know what to trust in anymore at all. And this, you mentioned this a little bit, and I want to confirm this for you, Janet. If you grow up in a family system where there's a lot of gaslighting, or where there is sort of toxic things going on, toxic to a child's development of self and a child's development of these senses. Yeah, let's just call it this way. Yeah, or dysfunctional, if you will. Um, it is a very, very common symptom, yeah, to come out of such a childhood, or come out of such a growing up experience with confusion. Yeah, especially the confusion that we then refer to as the sense of self. Yeah, because
yeah,
these developmental stages that I mentioned earlier, and I'm not talking about Erickson's developmental stages. I'm talking about literally, physical faculties. Okay, yeah, like in regards to the order in which our senses develop, starting in the womb. Okay, and when they get disrupted or inhibited, yeah, then we have other issues that come up with this. In a teaching environment, I can tell you that half of the kids that show learning disabilities or behavioral issues have some kind of sensory integration issue. Sensory integration. And this can be anything from, like an actual physical disability. Let's say somebody has a hearing or a speech impairment, yeah, to somebody experiencing severe trauma, yeah, a child experiencing severe trauma, or like what we would call a dysfunctional family system, where and you guys all have elements of that, where certain faculties were unwanted, where they perhaps had to be suppressed, yeah, or were they just simply not promoted, yeah, where there was too much sort of sequestering going on, self-monitoring.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. There's a lot of the, well, essentially it becomes, at least in the terms of when I was growing up, we didn't didn't have self healing, which would have been great as a teenager to be like have a touchstone, but it was definitely uh, like what we have to do through here. You don't use it, then you kind of lose it, and there's
Mm-hmm.
definitely
Mm-hmm.
a pushing down of, definitely a pushing down of certain parts that I couldn't have recognized, but that was the
Yeah.
mystery. It was like, what's going on with me? But things were getting pushed down, and
Yeah, and
um,
that's
yeah,
the big mystery in life, is who am I? And we when we already come into this world with, say, we have beautiful senses, and we have higher faculties that we don't even know about. It'd be good to know about them, like you said. Self-healing is a higher faculty. It would be enough to just send the message to our kids to say, hey, you can heal yourself. Oh yeah, really? Okay, cool. And you grow up with that belief, yeah, and you're much more likely to uncover that. Yeah. um, on the other hand, we also have forces that are working against this, yeah, societal forces, or forces that work through our societies, yeah, where I mean, and nowadays we talk a lot about censorship and stuff like that. At the end of the day, there's always been a certain level of censorship, depending on the agenda, but the agenda right now is very much targeting our sense of self. The sense of self is the culmination of all our senses, all our organs of perception, basically blocking. And I'm not even talking about spiritual perception here, but blocking the perception of ourselves. Yeah, the ability to understand ourselves. And with it, then the ability to understand our journey, to understand purpose, to understand values, to understand our path. So that's quite a bit of challenge that we have nowadays, yeah, which we will discuss later. How this kind of force that I've already identified in previous workshops, as a dark force working through, our societies, not as a certain person or, like them or they or something, but more so as an adversarial force. Okay. And adversarial forces, they allow us to learn certain things. So the conclusion at the end of the day, and this is done something that we call, the spiritual initiation, the spiritual awakening, is to recognize that there is a purpose in that confrontation with adversity. Yeah, there is a purpose in that, because through the adversity, through the, as I often call it, the confrontation with untruth, the confrontation with unlove, the confrontation with unfreedom, we are learning to use our higher faculties. Okay, so yes, we can sit here and, of course, complain that nobody told us, yeah, that there's something like self-healing or, other faculties that we've discovered in the course of our lives. But we can also look back and say, oh, wow, it's amazing. It's exactly those adversities. It's exactly all this pain, the struggle, and the challenges that I had to face, that I was confronted with, that allowed me to uncover them. Yeah. So that's basically the message here. Yeah. The message is, all right, be it as is. Okay. Yes, it helps us to become more aware, to become more conscious of, like how things formed. But then we need to let all that go and look forward and really focus on, what we can do with these insights, with, these impulses that we are now feeling through having made the unconscious more conscious. All right, that allow us to do things differently. Yeah. So that's just here on a side note. Mandy, I see
Well,
your hand.
at the
So,
time, like in our past, I didn't like. I'm not even come close to complaining because when I put myself in
mhm,
that place right now, I know very well. I was like, I don't feel comfortable. Something's not right. How am I going to solve this? I chose several unhealthy quote unquote methods, but
mhm,
that's kind of along the lines of saying, there's that whole thing about people who become alcoholics or drug addicts or something like that because they're looking for the escape, they're looking for the healing because they don't have a tool to. And
yes,
it was the same thing. It was sitting in that
yes.
moment in my past. I was like, oh, what a drag. I can't find my true self right now. I mean, it wasn't that. It was like, okay, get out a magazine and read an article and see what I can do. It was those steps
Mhm.
to take myself away from that ambiguity to be able to take control of my life, basically, in some way.
Yeah. And with that, then ultimately to develop a stronger sense of self. So that's then, basically the karma of this. The karma, not in the sense of a punishment or price we have to pay, but the actual purpose that was behind or underneath these adversarial experiences. Yeah, that's when you become conscious of something. That's when you recognize that how it was, yeah, and how it served you. No matter how far you've come with it, but for you to be able to pinpoint, oh, it was like this and it is no longer, and to even be able to guess or to, induce sort of why it was that way, all right, allows for all that confusion and distraction that comes in through a confused sense of self, say, yeah, allows that to diminish, and it makes things more clear, even if we don't have it all figured out yet, if we don't have all the answers. But to just simply, be able to articulate, like you guys do this here right now, yeah, like, okay, I learned to not trust in this, learned, not as in like I wanted to learn this, but that was just circumstantial. All right. And I had to rely more on that. And this is why my perception developed in a certain way. That in alone is already enough for you to recognize why, yeah, because that's often a big part of the distraction and the confusion. Yeah. And also perhaps then in the next step, what it is that you could change or what you could work on or what you could experiment with, what you try. Yeah, so
Yeah, because
that's a
looking
positive.
back, you can look like right now.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of let's drop, which really isn't that hard. We make it really hard, but if we really drop any blaming or oh, this is my story of that time, and put ourselves in certain moments in time in our life, like I could flip myself back to when I was 16 years old or something,
Mm-hmm.
and sit in that place right now. I can go, I can at once forgive my everything. I could be
Mm-hmm.
like, it's okay, and kind of snap my fingers and realize that like this workshop is about, it was just my perception of everything,
Yeah,
and I almost can re-see that part of my life differently, which then kind of makes a bridge to where I am now. Energetically, it's almost like this big
absolutely.
wave that just goes, ooh, okay. And it's not
Also
airy fairy
psychologically.
wave.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it kind of, I don't want to say it wipes out your brain, but it kind of takes away a lot of the emotional clinging of stuff we don't let go of and we keep repeating and repeating. It heals that a lot more. Yeah, to go
Mm-hmm.
back there and say how it's not intellectual. It's like how, you get this little wave of what's, how could I perceive that moment a little better? And it's usually less dramatic than what we've
Mm-hmm.
made it out to be
Well, I mean,
sometimes.
it's a bit more holistic. Yeah, I want to throw in that word holistic here. I also know that you like it. Um, you see it from a bigger picture, from a bigger perspective.
Yes.
Yeah, when you put yourself into your shoes back then, you see, you can remember, you can see it through the eyes of back then. Okay, if I look into my past and I look at choices that I've made, and I look at it from the perspective of back then, I can totally see how I made those choices, and I'd probably do it again. I'd probably do it again if I was exactly at the same level of perception that I was at the time. But seen from today's perspective, where I have a much bigger understanding of how and why and so forth, I come to different conclusions. So I have no hard feelings about that.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I don't even have to go back and beat myself up over what I did back then because I understand that my perception at the time was structured in that way that whatever I decided seemed to be the only way out or the only way to resolve something or whatever. Yeah.
It
And
kind of removes the linear, like our perception of our life is so linear. And once we're able to
yeah,
do this and widen that bridge and widen that perception to go quote unquote back to then, it kind of it gives it more dimension. You can go back there and feel,
yeah,
allow that person to feel gratitude, like it wasn't a feeling that was happening then, or at least wasn't recognized. And maybe go back and say, I was a happy gratitude person, and there's this other stuff, but to keep nurturing those feelings
Mm-hmm.
in one's
Th-
then a
that's
broader life. You've
that's then already self-healing. You right now what you're coming up with, or what your system is coming up with, is already self-healing techniques or strategies. Yeah,
yeah,
because
that's
by
the thought. Yeah,
using your empathy, yeah, to go back in time, basically, yeah, and see the world through the eyes that you saw the world as back then. That's empathy. You're using empathy for that. Okay, you're putting yourself into your past self shoes. All right, and you understand that from that perspective, yeah, no matter, regardless of how you see it today, okay, it seemed very limited. Yeah, so people, for example, like myself, who had suicidal ideation as a teenager, okay, it's really, really important to do that. Yeah, to understand why I felt that way, why I wanted to kill myself. Okay, because I did, it did feel that way. There was
yeah,
no other,
yeah.
there was no other path.
No, it's a
Okay.
very narrow, tough
Yeah.
place to be,
Yeah.
and you can now at this point uh, not just understand why that was happening, but also like put your like that person. You can go in into that
Mm-hmm.
person and broaden it
Mm-hmm.
and allow your past person to feel who you are now.
Right. That's a self-healing strategy. That's really the healing of the past self. But where it actually comes into application is when you go forward in life, and when you feel that way again, say you have a temporary state where you feel that way again, to then recall, that wiser, that more mature you that already knows, that there's sort of a light at the end of the tunnel. You just have to kind of be willing to see it. And of course, it's also, there's multiple things that play into this. So we're going to talk about this here in the course of this workshop series, what these factors are that make it easier for us to remember that. Yeah. So that we know what to focus on in those kinds of situations. Yeah. Because we can all get into any of these situations again. Yeah. Not being able to trust others, not being able to trust our own perception, not being able to, access our higher faculties, even though we already know, maybe intellectually, that we have them, but just not getting past, that feeling in that moment. Yeah, this is a big part of the distraction, and what Sheila said earlier, where the majority of our energy goes a lot of time. It's like, gosh, I already know this stuff, and why is it so hard for me to do this? Yeah, that kind of confliction that we often have. To understand that confliction and to understand, how our perception, the way we perceive ourselves, the way we perceive the world at a given moment, which of the faculties we are perceiving it with. Yeah, start with the channels. Okay, those channels are unconscious to us. That is something that we form in childhood. So let's just go back there for a minute, because Mandy, you have been waiting so patiently to finally share. Okay, so
Oh
you
no,
are
that's
on.
okay. Thank you. No, I actually just wanted to ask you if you had a particular test or something that I should maybe do. I'm feeling a bit behind everyone in that I know that I've struggled to learn my whole life in a typical like academic way, and recently embarked on some more studies, well, some studies that took me a long time to pluck up the courage for, and I battled.
Mhm.
I really battled. And one of my moderators actually said, I think you're struggling with this because you're more of a visual learner. And I thought, oh, that makes a lot of sense. No one's ever actually even brought that to my attention. And yeah, so I'd like to know if you have something
You
you
can
could
self-test.
recommend.
Yeah,
Oh,
self-test. I mean,
okay.
there are some things that I use with kids.
Mm,
Kids are just like, they're like our unconscious. Okay, so they're not
okay.
conscious of that at all. And some of the things are, like in general, like how the kids and grown-ups do this too, but grown-ups often monitor this, so it's not as pure as it is with kids. But for example, the vocabulary words that somebody will use. Okay, so kinesthetics will often use the word I feel like blah blah blah. Okay. um Visual, people who are primarily relying on their visuals, they will say things like I see, I see,
Okay.
okay, I see. Or auditory
But is
people
it
will use words like I hear you, or it sounds good.
but is it a learning style or like a perception test really? Like a bit of both?
No, I mean, no,
Okay.
we're talking very primary here, okay, and that has really something to do with the way you process information, okay, and
Mm,
that then affects your learning style, okay, because if you're not visual at all, okay, yeah, then the best slides, yeah, or a video showing you how to do this isn't going to work for you. You will not
mm,
have the patience, okay, to watch it. You will not have the patience to look at an elaborate slide, for example.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah. If you are not auditory, you will not have the patience to listen to directions. You will lose track. Okay.
Mm,
Auditory, yeah, auditory information used to be the least sort of attractive to me. Okay. When
yeah.
somebody gave me directions to a
Yeah,
place.
same. I just
Yeah.
switch off. I need them to
Yeah.
draw it.
No,
Draw me a
and
map
that,
in the
and
sand.
right there, yes, it's
Yeah.
so the self-test is more like a test of your own patience and your own attentiveness. Yeah. So when somebody describes to me how to get to a place, and they use descriptors such as you turn left and you turn right and da 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 and the street names and blah blah blah, I lose them after the first corner. If they use descriptors such as if you come to that building, that red building, the big
Yes.
one that
Yeah,
sticks
yeah.
out,
Yeah.
I immediately have like sort of an inner
Connect with
map.
it.
Yes, you
Yeah.
you don't
I
need to
remember you
describe.
said this in our
Hmm.
last workshop actually, and that's what planted the seed for me when you kind of actually brought it to my attention,
Hmm.
and that made me click and go, oh, it's exactly what you said at that time. I can't remember what it was, but I think because I've been so dysregulated for so long,
Hmm.
that my
It's possible.
ability is, yeah. So do you think that because
No, you just it's
as
really
I get
just
more
information.
regulated, yeah,
It's just
okay,
info. At this instance, Mandy, it's just info.
process.
Okay, because
Thanks.
once you know that you're not an auditory person, yeah. So first, we will find we will find out about the things that are least attractive to us. That's usually the easiest one to pinpoint. Yeah. So that's why these examples are often good. Yeah. So if you know that about yourself, that auditory information isn't really attractive to you, okay, then you already know that all learning styles that have to do with having to listen to somebody for a long time, yeah, even talking to somebody on the phone, isn't really a way for you to fully process information. The question is, and that's the self test, what is more attractive to you? What do you retain better? What
Okay.
what way of information coming in allows you to internalize things more and more correctly? So there's also something about accuracy. You know, people that are not auditory, they often hear things wrong. They just do because they just don't have. I mean, with kids, I would call it attention span. Yeah, with the grown up, it's not always an attention span thing. It's often
Inter
actually an overlay that happens in their heads. So people have issues with auditory information often, not always, but very often, unless there's some kind of actual sensory problem, like hearing problem. They have such a strong inner voice. They're so loud that they often can't hear what other people say. And then, the psychologist can come in and say, well, sometimes you have that with people who did not feel heard as a child. And, they create this inner voice, and that inner voice then overshadows their ability to hear outer things. Yeah, that could be one of the reasons. But it really doesn't matter. Really what matters, that's why I like calling it a piece of information about yourself, understanding, or in the attempt to understand yourself better, is knowing that about you. Just know that about you, okay? Hearing is not your forte, at least not right now, okay? But then the question is, what is your forte?
Yeah, I got to
Are you,
figure that out.
yeah, are you really good
Yeah.
at visual stuff? Are you someone like I'm someone, I can paint a picture of what I saw. I could be one of those forensic drawers, designers. I can draw something really well and very accurate what I saw. I can make really cool illustrations of what I'm trying to express. Yeah, so there's a very accurate translation going on, yeah, between my sight and between the information that I retain. I am not good at using my words to explain it. You just got to know that about yourself. So when I'm trying to explain something to someone and I realize they're not really understanding me, then I take a piece of paper and a pen and say, okay, look, right? I switch to the visual and make a drawing. Now, with kids, and as a teacher, I make an effort to use all 4 channels for the same information. So if I want to teach something, I do it on all these levels. First, I explain, then I show. Then I have them do like a manual activity or some kind of physical activity that involves their bodies, yeah, to recreate it. Okay. And then I talk to them about the feeling that they have along with that. My hunch here with you, Mandy, is that you're very kinesthetic. So you retain information by the way it makes you feel.
Oh, I wondered what that meant, calisthenic. Yeah, I was going to Google
Mm-hmm.
all that. But the
Yeah.
thing is, Jona, I
Mm-hmm.
think my feeling, my ability to what was the word? I've been
Discern.
dysregulated so bad. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
discern. Because of the dysregulation for so many years, I'm only waking up now to the fact that I need to actually internalize and connect and come back to myself. And all the
Mm-hmm.
pain and sufferings led me to the point where I really want to make that journey now. But it's kind of like, well, what tools do I equip myself with best? Do I do more art? Do I get more creative? Because I've been yearning for colors and
Mm-hmm.
textures and just doodling with paints. And it's really
Yeah.
helping me to just stay in myself because it's so
Yeah.
uncomfortable coming home to me that I just avoid. And all I've done is just distract myself with other stuff,
Yeah.
people, helping other people, or doing other things, or any excuse to not be with me.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, okay, I'm ready. I can do this.
Hey,
So,
anything that comes up
yeah.
for you, if the doodling, if the drawing, if the painting comes up for you, go for it.
Yeah.
It might not be the one answer that you're looking for because, quite frankly, there isn't one answer.
Yeah. It's a
Okay,
start, at least.
it's a really good
Yeah.
start. Yeah, it's a really
Mm.
good start. I mean, what you just articulated, Mandy, is the most coherent, that I've ever have heard you express. Okay,
Oh,
your own
thanks.
state. Okay, so this is a very good development here for you. you
Can
know.
you start an adult school so we can come and play?
Well, isn't this
Yeah.
what this is?
No, but to play, I want to roll in the grass and run and
Well,
jump
yeah,
and
well,
sing and paint pictures and stick them on the fridge.
yes, but
No, I know what you
I
mean.
I can't even tell you how many times I think about this, because the whole tactile part is missing, and it is
Yeah.
so important for many of us, especially if we have had an upbringing, of dysregulation or dysfunction or trauma, because that is
Yeah.
one of those things that are disrupted. Okay, and a lot of times in psychology, this would be the class of somatics. Okay, a lot of times, physical activities are the only things that really help with this. It is something that I mentioned to many of you on occasion, where I said, the way to address this is in the physical. Yeah, is actually to forget all about etheric and astral and all the fancy stuff. Okay, yeah, forget about that for now. Yeah, create a good base level of reference feelings within your body, and use your body as a compass. And then there are people that are too much in their body, and then there are people that are too much in their heads, and then there are people that are too much in their desiring or in their feeling. So this is all part of energy coaching, me with together with the individual, working this out, yeah, and developing self-healing strategies, all right, that they can then apply to it's not really a counteracting, it's more like a supplementing. So from an energetic point of view, it's more something that is missing, or that hasn't really been trained or refined well enough for the person to be to be serving, yeah, to be accurate enough. Jared, you and I had many discussions about this in the energy healer training, where I tried to explain that the visual perception is a wonderful tool. But if we rely on our visual without, the other senses to verify them, okay, then we might be, we might easily be misled, or we might get pulled in or get lost, in the visual. So the truth of the matter is, and we're going to learn about this here in a few minutes, is that we have many more senses than we are aware of. Okay, so these primary channels, they are just sort of a beginning of self-observation. That's like you trying to figure out, well, what do I actually rely on the most? How does that go within me? Am I somebody who is, able to retain visual information, tactile information, auditory information, or kinesthetic information? Yeah, and how about my ability to recall it? Yeah, so when you say, Mindy, when you talk about academic learning, I mean, at least in the classic sense, is typically auditory visual. Yeah, the
Yeah,
tech,
that's why
the
I
tech,
struggled so much.
yeah, the
Yeah.
tactile part is very little. I mean, nowadays, from a pedagogy point of view, we know that a lot of kids need a much more tactile imprinting, but it's still very little. And kinesthetic is not wanted at all. In fact, the school system is designed to cut out the kinesthetic part. Yeah, the educational system that we all, the intellectual, the cognitive um, education, cuts out the kinesthetic. It cuts
Why
out
do
the
you think
feeling
they
part.
do that?
I mean, I lectured about this a few times. This has
Mm,
to do with the developmental aspects of our society. Okay, so
mm.
we have a certain scientific paradigm. In the simplest way for me to express it would be that since the 15th, 16th century, it was all about cutting out subjectivity. okay, and making things objective. And in the process of objectifying things, we've materialized things to a point where we are now in our societies where we've completely cut out all aspects of being human, yeah, where we see human life as something material only. Whereas in the Middle Ages, it was the other extreme. Everything was just based on feeling, right? If you think back to the times of the witch hunts or whatever, it was all just about how people felt about something. Okay, so in a way, seen from a bigger sort of developmental point of view, you see that there are these pendulum swings, from one faculty, and then eventually overemphasizing that, into the other extreme, and sort of slowly finding its middle ground. Yeah. So there, what I mean to say with that is that the why question, all right, largely depends on the time scale that you're looking at. Okay. So why did we have to learn, or why are we learning? What are we learning right now, in a time where everything is being reduced to, where life is being reduced to a mechanical, machinistic, and materium? What are we learning through that? We're learning what we're not. Okay. Yeah, but everything that we learn in the process, like say about cells and DNA and molecules and all that, well, we got that under our belt. So the next developmental stage, in our collective development, will be to bring the feeling back in, and now to combine it. There's lectures where I talked about actually the first, this year, issues with spiritual awakening. I go a little bit into the history of human developmental stages and how, throughout the millennia, how we as a whole humanity, mastered certain aspects of our faculties, all right, that then, it's like a bell curve. They go into the extreme at some point where they then collapse, where they then go into the other extreme for a while, okay, and where they then find sort of the equilibrium. So I used intellectualism as an example. The height of the intellectual development, okay, was really, in the Greco-Roman era, like 250 BC. Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, who did all these investigations of dialectic and logic. Okay, that is the height of the human intellect. Now you might say, oh wow, this is like 2,000, 100 years ago. Like how can she say that? Well, we've added information, we've added data to our knowledge base, but not really the way we think. Okay, so that is about to change right now. Yeah, so there's multiple aspects, to that question that you asked, why. We have to go through it because in order for us to grow into our higher faculties, we have to learn how to master them. And the mastery always also depends on, or includes or must imply, what not to do. Okay, what not to do. Yeah. So, but that's, as far as the collective development is concerned. As far as our individual development is concerned, understanding ourselves, understanding our journey is, sort of at the foundation, at the real, it's the basis of our spiritual growth. Okay, to first understand how things work in us, yeah, and how we think, how we feel, and how we choose. And whether we like it or not, but that's what we need to work with. And that's a very long process. That's a process we need several lifetimes for. And I can't even say this enough for you guys to haven't arrived at a point in your journey where you can articulate these kind of things, even though you may still feel that there's a lot of kinks and flaws that still need to be worked on. But you are, the fact that you can articulate it, that you can say, this is what I found out. This is, basically, how I recognize, like what is going on in my life, and how one thing led to the other. That's huge. That's huge. Yeah, the next level of that, yeah, Janet, how you called it self-healing, okay, is to use yet another ability, and that is to actually start, feeling into, thinking about, using all these things, all your senses, to find out how you can heal that, how you can mitigate that, how you can harmonize that. So underneath all of these things that I say that have to do with bringing things into balance and harmonizing things is, of course, a certain value system. And that value system has to do with understanding that everything in nature fundamentally is perfect the way it is. Okay? And that includes me, regardless of how flawed or imperfect I'm experiencing myself. The fact that I can experience myself as flawed and imperfect, by the way, comes from a higher faculty, right? There's got to be an impulse in you that says, I could do better, right? So that's the one we are exploring, really, when we embark on this journey that we call awakening. An awakening is the process of making something that was previously unconscious conscious. And in that process, healing takes place. And healing then provides a new basis, a new foundation for new ways, new impulses, new perspectives, new pathways for betterment, trying something new, experimenting, learning from the past. That's the fundamental framework that I use to do any lecture, to do any workshop, to introduce any kind of technique that has to do with self-healing, because self-healing fundamentally is the willingness to change, the willingness to improve something, not the striving for a higher self. And I go as far as calling this the divine impulse in us, the striving for a higher version or the higher expression of ourselves. We should never use this impulse to beat ourselves up. That is a misconception. That is partially, what is injected through this, societal adversity. Yeah, where society tells us that we should level up or live up or compare with or compete with something like an ideal. And to get to that place where you can actually recognize that whatever the society or a certain group or your parents or whatever put up there as an ideal is actually an illusion, yeah, which we call discernment. That's discernment. Yeah, discernment means to be able to differentiate and to know the difference between what's true and what isn't.
That's that's that wider perspective again, because it's with such strong programming that
Yeah,
so many don't
it's a
want to
framework.
jump off that cliff because it seems
Yeah,
like it's a cliff, but it's already, yeah, exactly. It's just like snap your fingers and it can just disappear kind of feeling, but there's
yes,
nothing bad. You're not going to fall and hurt yourself.
no,
You're getting more hurt sitting in the illusion because
yeah,
it's so comfortable. She keeps getting in my stone things.
no, it's so true, Janet. It's so true. Yeah, that's the whole. That's the teaching of the Course in Miracles. Is that it's possible any second. Yeah. Why? Because you have the ability. You have the ability to change your perspective, and with that, obviously it's a bit more complex because there's also the will, to follow through with it and all that. That is part. It's all part of our perception system. But we have the ability. We all do. So I can, as much as I can put myself back into my 13-year-old state, all right, I can also put myself into my 80-year-old state. I can do this both ways because I have uncovered that whatever my perception tells me at a given moment, it's really just a matter of how I choose to see things. And how I choose to see things depends on several components. It depends on what I used to, see. Yeah, the senses that I use to see things. Yeah, if I walk through the world only with my eyes and I shut my ears and I shut my other senses, I shut down my touch, and I shut down my feeling and my spiritual perception. If I just walk through my life with my eyesight, do you think that I am getting an accurate depiction of reality? If I were to close my eyes and put myself into the shoes of a blind person and I don't see anything visually through my seeing nerve, and I have to rely on my hearing, and I have to rely on, my senses that can pick up on, vibrations with a higher range, right? Do you think that I am getting a more or less accurate depiction of reality? So these are just questions, like for some mental flexibility here, okay? And that's the reason why we investigated. I didn't even plan on that, but it's really wonderful that we had that conversation about our primary channels of perception, because that is something that I'm assuming that you are aware of, okay? And if you are not, which is totally fine and no problem at all, just spend those next 2 or 3 weeks investigating that. What are some of these unconscious phrases that you use? Do you have a tendency to use words that have to do with seeing things? Yeah, I see. Yeah, I need to see it to believe it. Or do you have a tendency to use phrases that have to do with feeling? Oh, this feels good. Oh, yeah. The way I feel this, da, da, da. Do you have a tendency to use auditory expressions such as I hear you, this sounds good? Or do you have a tendency to use physical body sensations? Grab a bite and let's, dig in to the subject. Let's dive deeper. Those are all tactile expressions. And it gives you a sort of a surface layer, often just the primary channel of perception, and then the secondary is your backup. It's a backup. So I'm a kinesthetic person, like actually most females, and especially most empathetic females. Very kinesthetic. I make my perception of reality primarily depend on the way it feels to me. Problem with that is it drove me into suicide. Yeah, because I didn't have enough other faculties to verify, to discern what I was feeling. Obviously, I see this differently now. And I can even pinpoint what it was that I felt back then. Okay. But when you're caught in that and you do not have the faculties, or you don't have these senses trained that can help you to verify your perception, then that's what you take as your reality. Yeah, take the pandemic time. The pandemic time, which seems so long ago. It's only 2 years ago, guys. Where 90% of people on this planet were flushed with a fear for their life. I don't mean this in a critical way. I'm just observing this. They're completely stuck in that perception that if they get COVID, they're going to die. Give me a hand sign, guys. How many of you have had COVID? How many of you have had COVID multiple times? Probably 2 or 3 times. Yep. All right. So effectively, this is a fact, you're not dead. Okay. If you knew that 2, 3 years ago, would you have made different choices? Yeah. Okay. So, but you didn't, right? You didn't. Now, let me hear you. Those of you who would have made different choices, did you have an inkling perhaps, or was there like an impulse in you that did you have a conflict? Did you pick up on something on some level that made you uneasy about the whole
Jona,
pandemic thing?
yeah, I could give you a really great example at this point, kind of using that same, the sensory perception part of like
Mm-hmm.
visually and seeing all this stuff and all this, and that sensory insight part going, something doesn't match up. And I really found myself feeling like there was way more information. It was like it wasn't. I was like, this isn't accurate. Something doesn't feel right about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really found myself doing what I have always done, which is I just kind of waited it out, kind of in a behind the scenes in the corner kind of way, and waited to see what was going to go down in ways that I could stay afloat and not basically be looked upon, because everybody
Mm-hmm.
else was doing things because they were being told to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kind of silently waited myself out, because I knew for me personally, it wasn't just some of the decisions that everybody was making weren't accurate in terms
Mm-hmm.
of what we really needed to be doing. And of course, where I work. So it's when you work government kinds of stuff, it was a whole nother level of
Mm-hmm.
trying to wait that out, and then still try to get work and jobs and lead people into places that you knew other people were going, wait a minute, we should be at the office doing our job, you know, and things like this. So we were
Schools shouldn't be closed, right? It's not good
yeah,
for
right.
kids,
Like
you know, if the schools are
the school
closed.
shouldn't be right.
Yeah.
And so it was all of that stuff was actually like very like of course in your face at that time. And it was navigating through, okay, how how can we still comply with certain things that doesn't get you, I don't know, in a lot of trouble versus how can you still hold on to some of your own integrity with something that doesn't feel right?
Right. And this is right there, where we get in trouble with ourselves. Okay. Because that's, when we look at what influences our perception. Okay. So during the pandemic, we were heavily influenced through visual information. You have to think about it, all these pictures that they showed on social media, even the articles, the pictures that they picked, for the article headlines, and then the headlines themselves, and then the death counters and all these kind of things, all very, very visual data. Data in itself, all just visual. There's very, very few people who actually took the time, who had the attention span, who had the attraction to actually read it and comprehend it. Yeah, like I'm not trying to be critical here. I'm just saying, like, it was very clear from the beginning that COVID is not dangerous for children. There was no dispute. This was not disputed at all. How does it actually make sense to keep the kids at home, all right, to prevent the pandemic from spreading? Now, I understand that, when lots of people come together, when they congregate, there's a lot more exchange of that. But then at the same time, we also know, and this is something that we as a collective know for like 250 years, yeah, that there's something like a natural immunity that we all have. So when we get sick and it doesn't even take a big effect on our body, yeah, and we form antibodies, all right, then we're protected. And not just that, we also kind of bringing that into our environment. We're bringing the antibodies into our environment as well. So really, the moment I knew, for example, that children aren't really that affected, the case was closed for me. All right. I knew that we're not going to die. And so for me, and you guys know this is my personal history here, closing the schools, keeping the kids from interacting with one another, and forcing them to wear face masks, which completely eliminates their ability to develop speech, to read people's feelings, was such a terrifying prospect that it didn't even take a lot of courage. It was a total non-brainer for me to say, I'm not doing this. I'm not complying with this. I'm actually starting a school. I'm starting a school right at the beginning of the pandemic that defies all that. And I'm willing to stand up for that. So not, to diminish the conflict here, Cindy, but such conflictions can also lead to higher levels of resolve, higher levels of clarity within. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, like,
Well, again, it's like if we put ourselves back in those moments, we can see, number one, I can discern that, again, it's like a giant dysfunctional family, the world government, saying one thing that seemed clear, like you could maybe understand the concept of what is going on, what's safe and what's sick and what's immunity, but then the actual behaviors, the whole kinesthetic experience of humanity, uh, the actual being and day-to-day
mhm,
activities were like they didn't coincide. So there's the
exactly.
whole big mind
Yeah.
wipes and a giant darkness
Yeah.
that we can get caught in every single day. So it's good to be like energetically go, okay, well, how does that feel? What's that like? And who am I really in the middle of all that? I'm not that behavior. I'm not a face mask.
So I was I
Polar
wasn't even going
energy
as
mask.
far, right, as like conspiring or like going as in like why or whatever. You know what I mean? There was such a clear compass in me. It was so clear that regardless of all the stuff that I saw the same things that you saw. But I used all my other senses to question that. I'm like, wait a minute. No, wait a minute. First of all, what are their death stats based on? Okay. So I read up on it and I'm like, oh, there's a mathematical flaw in that. Weird. Okay. What are what is that fear mongering based on? There's a 3% chance of being severely or fatally impacted by COVID. That's a little higher than the flu. But who of us, you know, runs around with hand sanitizers and locks themselves up because of the flu? I don't know anybody. Okay, so there's something here, that from even from that intellectual level, including obviously my ability to read studies and medical research and so forth, that said to me, well, whatever that is, whoever that does that, I'm not even going and guessing about that. I'm not going to go with it. That's not true. Whatever they're saying is not true. I don't care who, I don't care why, it's not true. Obviously, I have theories and I did extensive reporting about this throughout the pandemic, and you know that, and I don't want to go there right now, but I want to use that as an example for misperceptions. And it's very important for us to understand what it is that influences our perception. So number one cause for misperceptions is obviously us not really understanding our own perception. That is the first thing. Yeah. And that has to do with what we worked out here in the first three workshops about issues with awakening is unconsciousness. We're unconscious of it. Okay. We're so caught up in autopilot, or just following what other people do, or who we think we have to be, or what other people expect us to be, that we have no real sense of self. And worse, in some cases, that we feel powerless, or that we feel that we have absolutely no chance of changing anything, that they're all out there to get us. Yeah, that the world is hostile, that we have no control. It's something, Janet, that you said earlier, like the sort of the missing message that we actually can change something. Okay. If nobody tells us that we can self-heal, we're not going to try to self-heal. Then the second part, yeah, that's then the consequence of being unconscious and not having developed a proper sense of self is the confused self and the empty self. Yeah, where we have no real sort of touchdown or reference, like framework for when we are in ourselves. Mandy, that's something that you mentioned earlier. Yeah, it's like being without a compass altogether. The third part, and this is the part here that is coming through in us because we can, is the impulse to actually wanting to know truth. The problem with wanting to know truth is that when our framework is based on misperception or illusion or Maya, if you will, is that we look in the wrong places. You see here as a keyword spiritual consumption, yeah, where we just try to find a way out, and perhaps end up in fantasy worlds, that are just the other extreme, of the emphasized materialistic view of life. It isn't really until something in us comes forward, and that you know typically comes forward through our struggles, through our inner confliction, through our isolation, through all those pains and all those wounds that we experience, the disconnect. And that is our true self. Yeah, that's where, we've had enough. We've had enough, and we really, really want to, I think, Mandy, you said this earlier, you really want to understand yourself. You really want to be conscious and an active participant in your journey. And that then requires us to purge our old self. It requires us to let go of our old framework. That is then sort of the next challenge, because now we go through grieving, and we go through, all sorts of letting go pain. Now, including some of our relationships, including our jobs, including our environments, because we realize that, whatever it is that we're surrounding ourselves with, that we're exposing ourselves to, might not be conducive for living a more authentic life. So we start seeking. And the reason why I brought this up here, is just to bring back the goal of it all. So when we talk about number 5, higher self connection, what are we talking about? We're talking about being able to understand ourselves, being able to understand our journey, including our past, and being able to freely choose our path for the future, which all require us to stand in and utilize all our senses, all our faculties. Okay, that's the goal. The goal is not to find a magic wand or win the lottery. The goal is to refine, to purify, and to develop these senses and these abilities that we all have. It's just that, and we've worked this out together, that there are things in our environment, materialism, literalism, also sort of this tendency to be just apathetic about things. Oh, doesn't matter what I do, nothing changes. But here, the perception of truth, the perception altogether, the perception of ourselves, and some of that monitoring or sort of mental censoring that we do, that is at the core of the issue. We can't really change our society, at least not, in one day. Once you understand how you can change your life through changing your perception, and understand yourself better, what you are, who you are, and why you're here, well, then you might actually begin to see that there are solutions for that as well. Okay, but we have to start here. And this is something that we've already worked out. Yeah, what the problems are, the core of the problem with awakening, the core of the problem. If you look at all these things, and these are all things that you came up with, identifying with my thoughts, duality of my ego, the hardwire between my body and mind, which is basically our subconscious and our unconscious, the perception, the way we see our life, okay, and the unfree thinking. Those are all perception problems, guys. That has to do with perception and the senses that we use or don't use. Now, here, just as a reminder, some of those slides that we used, to determine, what our life view is. And some of you have brought up terms such as energetic perception. And I want to clarify this here because I use the word energetic perception quite frequently. And you got to understand that as an educator, I will use certain terms to explain certain things on certain levels. And as the audience changes, you could say, if I have to explain the concept of, let's say, addition and subtraction to a kindergartner, I will use different words than if I explain this to a 5th grader or to a 12th grader. All right. So if I talk about energetic perception in the context of, beginning stages of awakening, trying to become more conscious of all the unconscious stuff, then I use energetic perception, just like how a psychologist would maybe use the word extrasensory perception. So anything that is outside of our 5 senses. Okay. If you train with me, many of you have, I will then begin to discern the word energetic perception, and I will start differentiating it into etheric perception, astral perception, conscious perception. And then I will start dividing that into groups again, and I'll talk about higher thinking, higher feeling, higher willing, and so forth. So I do want all of you to understand that the way I have chosen to present this material is that in the beginning, I will use the word energetic perception as a blanket term for anything that is outside the ordinary, say, 5 senses of perception. And on that level, I can say, all right, so the way we see ourselves, and the world that we are in, I can use psychological terms to describe that. So if I'm in a very low state of perception, all right, which we call ego perception, I will experience myself as a victim somehow. I will experience myself as powerless. All right, I will experience the world as, well, basically just being there and coming over me. Yeah, things are happening to me. If I have become aware of some of the aspects in me, if I have a trained mind, a linear mind, like what our school system and our academia trains, all right, then I will begin to see the world more in the sense of things are being done by me. I did this. I'm doing this. I accomplished this. I decided that. When I go beyond this and I start seeking truth and learn ways to discern truth more, I will begin to understand myself and the world that I am in, the reality that I am in a more spiritual sense. And I will begin to see that things are happening through me. Yeah, many of the New Age streams call this being a conduit for something. Yeah, this is a larger perspective. Still, things are happening to you, and still, some things in your life are being done by you. All right. But there's a greater sense of maybe when you look at karma, when you look at destiny and fate and so forth, yeah, where things are happening through you. A life view in which you see yourself as part of a greater whole, and where you have a conscious sense of yourself, not the ego self, yeah, the small I, the one that you get for free, but the more refined one, the one where you can say, I am, yeah, I know who I am. Yeah, the I consciousness that leads us, through the spiritual initiation process, enlightenment, if you will, where you begin to learn the mechanics of manifestation, the mechanics of life, yeah, including energies, including life force, vitality, and so forth. You will begin to see yourself and the world that you live in more or less as an expression of something greater. You will begin to understand yourself as this divine being, yeah, that is trying to figure things out, that is trying to figure out how to grow into, his or her, its higher self as you. Yeah, so things are done as you. And in that state, not only are you much more optimistic than in the state of ego perception, where you fundamentally pessimistic, yeah, all you see is lack and death and fear and control. All right, you also realizing something else, and that is that you have a choice whom you want to live this life as. That's just a bit of a review, and then when you go a little deeper into the emotional and energetic states that you can find yourselves in, throughout your days, throughout your weeks, throughout your months and years, the oscillations, where you can, feel this way or that way, well, then it starts getting real interesting. You guys are all familiar with Hawkins's calibrated levels of consciousness, and they show us, and this is basically just a translation of Hawkins's scale here that you see on your screen. They show us that depending on which momentary state we are finding ourselves, that our perception changes along with it. So here we look more as a sort of a general tendency of how you see yourself acting as, or whom you see yourself acting as. Whereas here we're looking at, how that occurs. So bringing back myself as an example here, that the 13-year-old suicidal me, okay, was in an acute state of here, very, very low damnation. Something here, 25 on the calibrated level of consciousness. Very low, very, very low. And in that state, this is like basically here down at the bottom of powerlessness. Yeah. There's also color coding. So if you pay attention to my color coding, you'll notice that some of you have a good connection with this. Yeah. You have no other choice than feeling damned or feeling excluded or feeling like the best thing is to just disappear. Make yourself disappear. And we're not talking about how it comes to that place and what can be done. That's all part of coaching and healing and so forth. But I can tell you that this chart and helping people to understand how the way they see themselves and the way they see the world at a given moment is actually quite logical. There's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing wrong to see yourself as a victim when you are caught in fear. Because that is what the quality of that energy, say, yeah, that state that you're in does to you. Fear does that to you. Shame does that to you, that you feel excluded, that you feel disconnected from everything. You feel so disconnected that you feel disconnected from life itself. Specialness and pride to you that you judge, that you criticize, and that you try to control. That is what that does to you. When you are in these states, these states will do that to you. So should you therefore beat yourself up for being here, feeling this way? What do you think? Or should you rather
Yona, it's
want to become more aware of where you're at? Go ahead, Janet. You're breaking up a little bit, but give it a try.
what I was just um yeah, it's from the other chart. It's a matter of knowing if the stuff is going through you, and you are still a light being of joy, and you can still
Yeah,
feel that
yeah.
neutrality and joy. So that the discernment that, oh, this is just a big fat situation where I'm surrounded by jealousy and judgment and, a victim sort of situation that I'm in. People who are criticizing and confusing and
No, but
all
that's
of
what
that's
I'm saying.
going
It's like,
on.
forget that. Forget what you're
But to be
surrounded.
able
Forget what
to
you're
have that
surrounded by.
perception,
Yes, forget about
yeah,
anything that you believe where this is coming from. It's all illusion. Okay?
right,
Any of these states here below truth,
right.
you will be in an illusion. Whatever it is that you think
That
where it
is
comes from
so
is irrelevant. What you
yeah,
need to understand that the mere fact that you're perceiving it this
yes,
way
I agree.
tells you where you're at.
A little bit attached to it. So yes,
And that has to do with the other chart, with the way we contextualize what we're perceiving. Because if your overall state is here, you will automatically contextualize everything that you perceive as happening to you, which is an externalized life view. Yeah, you're powerless, there's nothing you can do. You don't cause anything. Everything's happening to you. And I'm not really, going very deep in explaining this here because I've done this in other workshops. But the point is that we understand that whatever senses, whatever channels of perception we're using, no matter what we're using, if we get stuck in these places, then these channels, organ senses that we're using, okay, are deceiving us. We do not get an accurate, or at least somewhat accurate, depiction of truth. And that's really all we got to know. If you're in fear, your ability to perceive truth is zip. Zip. Zero. If you are angry, your ability to perceive truth is zero. If you're in pride or specialness or trying to control, if you're judging, your ability to perceive truth is zero. Maybe a little better, in judgment than in depression. Okay, so there's a hierarchy to it here, but you still have the confliction, which is why people who are stuck in pride, specialness, and control are highly self-judgmental, highly confused, and self-criticizing. Which means they do experience the confliction. It's, by the way, one of the most painful states. Psychologists at least tell us so. One of the most painful states for us humans painful to our psyche, okay, is this state. Because we already have somewhat of a perception of truth and what we could do, but we're not doing it. Yeah, they call this a cognitive dissonance. That's one of the most painful states for our psyche, which I find very, very interesting as a spiritual counselor, as an energy coach. It tells me something about our purpose as humans and our developmental task. It's the most painful struggle for our psyche is to have an inkling about truth, but not actually stepping into it. Guess what that means? Guess what we're, quote unquote, supposed to do? Step into it. As a society, we're that close, but not quite there. And that is why a blasting out of fear can pull us so low, because we're not over the hump yet. And that's what you got to realize about your, all of ours condition. Yeah, it's often summarized as we live in a toxic environment, in a toxic society. And when I say toxic, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I do mean that. It is toxic to our task, to our inner impulse, which is finding truth. It is one of the strongest impulses that we have as humans, and also the very impulse that distinguishes us from all other living being in this material world. Seeking truth. And this is why I often point out, the spiritual questioning and the wanting to find out truth, that desire in us as the proof for higher consciousness existing in us. So that impulse, the wanting to see, quote unquote, I don't mean see as in visually seeing, but that's the English language, that to be in truth, to know truth. That impulse is the strongest impulse in all of us humans. And it bodes well, regardless of how good we are at it. The reason why we're often not good at discerning truth is because, well, we haven't really learned how to use our senses right. We haven't really learned how to train our organs, that we have for this discernment of truth, because nobody told us.
Well, plus, plus, plus society. I mean, it's again one of those things. It's just the ignorance of taking self-responsibility because everybody's on the little Ferris wheel having a good time, where half of the people on there, maybe a quarter, are going, wait a minute, this is going around and around. We're doing the same thing every day for the control and for the getting and for all the things that are below existing. And we are trained that way to keep up with it. And if you don't keep up, then you're supposed to start feeling bad when that's the moment where
Yeah, we
you
don't need to
change,
judge
you
that.
can allow, you can
Yeah,
accept, you can this
exactly.
right. You can find joy, you can detach from the stuff, to allow those things to
Yeah,
exist in
yeah.
our consciousness, to constantly be aware of these things on the top.
To align
It's
ourselves to
just
them.
people not wanting to grow up and be responsible.
Oh, we don't have to judge that. We can just observe that apparently the pain isn't big enough yet. Because we have a lot of examples of people who do. It's not that it's not possible. It's not like a trophy. Anybody who's ever stepped into truth, who had to muster all their courage to let go of something, to detach from something, to accept, to try, to allow, to be present enough, to be empathetic enough, to understand others along with that, to actually act from a conscious heart alignment, knows how hard that is. It's not a trophy to be in your heart. This is hard work, guys. It is something that we need to work for. It's something that we need to earn. So you say, well, everybody's on a Ferris wheel and having a good time. Well, I want to dispute that. Yeah, that everybody's having a good time. But everybody's telling themselves that they're having a good time, okay, until they reach a certain age. And then it catches up with them.
I was going to say too, you only can be ready when you're ready. It's
Yeah.
like, and that's the compassion for others, to just be able to observe and see that, wow, they're really going hard at it, or they're really struggling, and just having the compassion and remembering when I was there.
Mhm.
I was that person. I was in that same state, and when the perception skewed, and then just being able to sit back and observe and allow people the space to to grow and learn in their own capacity. And when they're ready, then they will start questioning and asking, but we
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
tell others, hey.
No, we can't judge them either.
No,
We
and
can't.
no judgment. It's like,
Yeah.
and I think I discovered that in myself when I actually stopped also judging the world,
Mm-hmm.
society, or whatever. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, awesome, guys, keep going. When you're ready, you'll be ready. And there's no other way.
No.
There's no shortcut. There's no shortcut to it. So, mm.
Yeah, you said something really important, Julian, and that is, the compassion, and it really needs to start with ourselves. To That's why I bring myself up as an example. Yeah, to go back and look at your own past and to say, to realize what state of perception you were in at a given time. Yeah, from that perspective, you could have not made any different choices. Why? Because you didn't think you had any different choices. Okay, so that's the problem with the perception, and that's the part that I wanted to drive home with you guys today, is that you realize that the lower your state of consciousness or awareness, if you will, the fewer options you have. But not because it's determined by the outside, but because it's determined by your perception of what choices you have. To give you an example, if you're in fear, you cannot imagine not being not in fear, right? In that moment, you cannot imagine that. You see everything through the lens of fear. If you're angry, you cannot imagine yourself being this empathetic, compassionate, abundant being. You can only see yourself in the state that you're in and lower. So you can see other options here. So everybody can always see, suicide as an option. Okay, opting out. Okay, slow or immediate suicide, depending on your belief system. Okay, yeah, because that's the lowest of the lowest. We can always see ourselves as so bad and so depressed, that it's not worth it, like the apathy. We can always see ourselves as a victim when you're angry. But anger is a little bit higher in its vitality, if you will, because it does bring in a little more energy. Many of us energetically sensitives have issues with anger. Did you know that? Because it's one of those poo-poo emotions or poo-poo states. Okay, nobody wants to be angry, at least not in an expressed way. But who of you has actually had positive experiences with anger? Anybody? Cindy, what are your positive experiences with anger?
So when I allowed myself to feel anger, it gave me enough energy to latch on to courage, which is above truth.
Mm.
And I was able to make lifestyle changes, relationship changes, went back to school, you name it. When I allowed myself to feel anger,
Mm-hmm.
it's not a bad emotion. I just was never taught that it was okay to be angry.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, even if it's out of spite. Yeah, but it can actually summon, yeah, quite a good amount of life force, okay, for you to wanting to break free. So the point that I want to make with this is that you understand these energetic states really just in their perceptionary purpose, rather than, oh, I feel so depressed. Oh, I feel so sad. Oh, that is so sad. Okay, and it must be because I'm so bad, and da da da. As you are doing that, you are feeding that state and further limiting your own perception. You will not be able to see, ways out, and you will not have enough energy, yeah, to muster, as Cindy just called it, the courage to step into truth. So this is why
So,
when we are
so
in these
Jona,
eh,
since we're talking,
mhm. Go ahead, Janet.
I just think since we're talking about perception, when we can uh, accurately perceive the state of being that we are in, something that we're feeling. Let's
Mm-hmm.
say we're feeling depressed, and we are conscious enough to be able to say, "I'm feeling depressed
Mm-hmm.
at this moment." Um, Perceiving it, and then the the purpose of perceiving something is to be able to use our perception to make a conscious choice at that point. Would the step out of that then be, we've probably talked about this a few times, to find out what we need? Is that one of the key
Yeah,
uh,
although that can be too complex of a
responses?
question. That can be too
Uh,
complex, okay? Because at that, depression is a good example. You're not going to be able to do that in that state. Okay, you can, however, have the overall level of consciousness to recognize that you're in depression. Okay, and
mm,
that's, if you talk to a therapist, the first thing a therapist will do, and that does help, is to show you that you're in depression. Okay, and what has to happen next is not trying to fix it, but a realization that whatever you're perceiving right now is not true. Okay, because any of these states here below truth, yeah, what we call ego perception, is filtered, is tainted, is restricted. It does not allow you to see truth. In other words, if you come to the conclusion that you're in a depressed state, be it, just a momentary state or, chronic state, the one connection that you need to make is that whatever it is that you are thinking, whatever it is that you are feeling, and whatever it is that you're sensing is not based on truth. And if you have been there before and worked your way out of it before, so this is the power of self-healing. If you've gone, through those kind of consciously experienced lower states, yeah, or dark nights of the soul before, and had worked yourself out, then it becomes easier because you can prove that to yourself. Yeah, so logic then, demands that you convince yourself and say, well, I remember being in that state before, and I remember what I thought and what I felt and what I perceived back then. And, a month later, I worked myself out of this and I felt much better. And all of a sudden, the world looked differently. So, really, all you got to remember, because there are states, these states here, 3, 2, and 1, are so powerless, they are so low in energy that you, out of yourself, are barely able to muster the energy to change them. It requires an environment. It requires a third person, yeah, a circle of friends or support system. Yeah, something that comes in from the environment to empower you enough to remind you of that, if that makes sense. Yeah, this is why, therapists, counselors, coaches, friends, partners, families, why they are so important, especially for the lower states. If a person doesn't have that, all right, then it's very, very difficult for them to work themselves out of this unless they have a life experience, yeah, something that they have experienced before where they can recall having worked themselves out of it, that can convince them that there's another day. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. The only other thing, and that is something that you begin to realize when you choose to pay more attention to the spiritual aspects of your being and perceiving, is that you can have a spiritual experience. But a spiritual experience in those low states bypasses the normal, quote unquote, normal, okay, channels of perception. It is not on the same level as you usually perceive things. And that's why spiritual experiences can be so healing. That's why spiritual practices, spiritual routines are so powerful, because you can apply them no matter how low your state is. Yeah, you can meditate, you can pray, you can talk to God or higher power, no matter how low you are. Meditate, maybe not so much. But addressing your inner dialogue to higher power and handing over your state to the higher power in you or outside of you, at that point, it doesn't matter how you contextualize higher power. But to hand it over and to say to yourself, right now, I am in such a low state that I cannot discern truth. No matter what it is that I try to do or fix or change, seems it doesn't work. I give up. I give up. I surrender to the higher power in me to find a solution. That is something that we can always do. And this is the secret of self-healing and spiritual initiation, is that you train, and there's a behavior training, that you train yourself to stop believing that the way you perceive your world and yourself at a given moment is based on truth. That you prove to yourself that your perception is fickle, that your perception is relative to the state that you're in. And that your mind, and this is something that we're going to explore next time, plays a crucial role in that. Yeah? How our thoughts, our ways of thinking influence our perception. Like how this goes, what was there first? But if that's, too intellectual and too detailed for you, if you just remember, when you find yourself in any of these states, these ego states, as we call them, okay, you can't believe anything that you perceive. Your perception is filtered. Your perception is debilitated. I'm not saying that everything you perceive in those states is wrong. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you're not seeing the whole picture. And
Well,
therefore,
too, isn't it too to realize at that point, because these are obviously very compressed states of energy down at the bottom, where
mhm,
the whole thing is to widen the energy more, that it's a two-way street too, to even start to get the pinhole a little wider, is to know that you've got, and this is like an internal knowing for me. It's like
mhm,
know that at that moment, not to think about it too much, but that it's a two-way street that even got me there, that there was some misperception that happened that pulled
mhm.
me into this area,
That's
and
not a
that,
misperception. That is your way of thinking, okay, and the framework. All right, that's why the thinking plays a very crucial role in our perception.
what,
Yeah, that's something that we investigate in the next part.
all right.
So
I mean, I
that
can see where it needs to be congruent between what's going on in our mind to have a full understanding and be in alignment. So what you're saying is that I didn't wind up down in this state because I made poor choices based on misperceptions, perhaps.
yeah, I would agree with that statement,
Okay.
but I want to go a step further and I want to say if you find yourself in any of these states,
Yeah.
you are suffering from misperception.
Okay.
And
Okay.
that is one of the biggest insights that we can have is that we can't believe shit in what we perceive until we have a properly trained mind and properly trained senses and a really good understanding of what debilitates us, what debilitates our ability to clearly see, sense, feel, and perceive.
Well, it's looking at where I mean, I wasn't good at coming up with the primary ways of sensing, but it's at least clear enough to say, well, to be truly responsible is to be conscious of the ones that I'm using and when, and see
Mm-hmm.
where the other ones are weak, and to
Mm-hmm.
make the time and space, instead of being in the routine or
Yes.
getting caught up in the wheel, to engage those, cultivate the other ones fully,
Mm-hmm.
the holistic part, every moment if possible.
Totally fair to say it this way. Yeah, it is also
Okay.
very neutral the way you just said that. There is no
Because
judgment in it.
I was doing a little
Mm-hmm.
test lately because things like were getting confusing again,
Uh-huh.
and I could notice where my brain started filling in, like, where is that person going? Where did they come from?
Yeah, yeah.
And noticing where I was wrong, and then noticing where I was right and why I was right or wrong. So
Yeah,
I was
and
like,
even that I would
ding ding.
dispute. I would dispute that. I you see what I'm trying to do here is to unhook you from this whole belief of right and wrong. Okay? All of you. I'm trying to prove to you that if you are in any of these states, and we are primarily, I mean, we all in these states all day long, our ability to discern truth is zero, mostly, unless you train it. You have to create pathways that allow you to bypass these old or unconscious automatic pathways of jumping to conclusions and making choices. And the good news is it's no problem. You just got to learn this. But it starts with, and Janet, I really like how you just expressed that. It starts with becoming more conscious of where you're at. Yeah. And asking yourself, why am I even entertaining this thought? What am I getting out of this? Why am I jumping to conclusions such as,
Yes.
oh, they're just doing this because of this? How does that serve me? What's my ego's agenda here? I have to realize that there's constantly an agenda taking place or living itself out. One that you, as the conscious self that you are, don't even subscribe to. That's not the type of person that you want to be. So there's a mismatch. And one of the things, and Janet, I hope this helps you when I reflect this back to you. This, many of you do this, but I noticed this especially with you, is that that's why it was so profound what you just said, is that you immediately jump to trying to fix things. When I say to you, don't believe anything that your mind or your perception tells you, I'm not trying to make you feel small. I'm trying to empower you to just become aware of that, because in that is the key to changing it down the road. But you first have to be willing to accept that and to sit in that and to literally, almost like enjoy the show. Get out your popcorn, okay, and watch
It's
your
true.
own ego, do all these storylines and, come up with these
Yeah.
interpretations and all that. And you're like, what the,
Yeah, I'm
this is
better when
funny.
my arms just go up in the air and I just go, okay, whatever.
Let the
I'm
program,
better like
let the program go through. It is a program,
that.
all right? And many of you already know that, all right? You have to kind of train yourself to consciously witness it and breathe through it. You got, have you ever been angry, Janet?
Yeah.
All right. Have you ever tried to stop yourself from
Me?
being angry? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you ever tried to stop yourself from being angry?
Some years ago, I understand. I understand it
It doesn't
better
work.
now. But
Yeah, it
I
doesn't work.
do.
Hmm.
With it's got to flow through, but it's just
Yeah.
a feeling. And if the judgment's not there, then it doesn't turn into this big
Yeah, exactly. Let it go through.
sucking
Let yourself be
hole.
angry. Okay, try to not damage too much in the process. Okay, so that's the part where my message here, don't believe shit. Okay, what comes up in you. Okay, just let yourself be angry. Okay, and then say to yourself, whoa, I'm really angry right now. Like just that you actually consciously perceive your own state. That is the key. Okay, and then wait till it subsides, because it is a temporary state that is sort of acting out. Yeah, the lower here on this level of consciousness it is, the more physical it will be.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, which means, for example, take low states, the lower states of pain. The lower states of pain have to do with grief and total apathy. Okay. Anybody who's ever lost somebody knows that that's excruciating, it's debilitating. But it is something that, regardless of how you contextualize it with your mind or even with your spirit, your body has to go through it. Grieving is a physical process. Yeah, it's just one example. Fear is a physical process, guys, on the level of neurotransmitters and glandular excretions. You have to allow that somatic experience to just go through its program. So what I'm saying is, Let's just call it dark night of the soul, okay? Whatever that, however that plays out for you, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, or all of the above, okay? When you're in a really low state, okay? There's a certain part of that process that just needs to happen. You're already in it, okay? The moment you can pinpoint it, the moment you can say, I'm going through a dark night of the soul, all right, it is. And in that moment, you already made the first step to overcoming it. But don't fight it. Okay? Oh yeah, I'm really low right now. The training, yeah, so that is perception training, that you can actually perceive that you're low. And the training in self-healing then is to know what kind of strategies, what kind of techniques you can use, yeah, to shift yourself gradually out of that state. This is one of the biggest issues that I have with the transfiguration through New Age, is that that you almost feel it's like a guilt tripping almost, that you are made feel guilty about being in a lower state. That is an error perception. Okay, some states, you because it's so physical, you just literally have to allow them to happen. Okay, yeah, and when you fight them, when you battle against them, all right, you're actually prolonging the process. It's obviously, from case to case, you're going to have to discuss this, because there is a, a phase where you have to let it happen, where you have to surrender to it happening in you. And then there is a phase where you have to observe yourself, where the ego begins to indulge in it, where the ego starts to feed it. So in perception training, you learn to differentiate that. Yeah, so let's say you experience a trauma. Let's say, you have a car accident, somebody, runs into your car, you get injured, your car gets totaled, and, the person was just some kind of, you know, unconscious person, drunk or whatever, for no reason, right? You did get victimized. All right, you did get victimized. This is real. Okay, you have damage to your body, you have damage to your car, to your money, and so forth. Yes, that is, you got victimized in that moment. Okay, and that needs to be processed. Now you have to process the fact that you have, like recovery time for your body, and recovery time for your finances. You have to process that. And there's obviously all sorts of emotions and all sorts of thoughts that are coming up in the process, yeah, of realizing that you just got victimized. But then there comes a point where your ego is going to start to use it. And that is what you need to be able to pinpoint. To use it to keep you low. It's not that your ego is against you or something, or that it's dark or anything. It is just, basically getting distracted through your physical pain, through your monetary loss. So it's a form of distraction that occurs in these lower states. Yeah, and our job then as conscious selves is to recognize when that process is done, yeah, the inevitable of that process, and to stop your ego from using it for a different agenda. For example, not wanting to take responsibility, not wanting to go back to work, not wanting to change something about the situation, not making phone calls, or, like things that you already sort of hear yourself, that's what I could do, that's what I could do. But no, I'm not doing that because, all right. So those are all, these tests and these temptations that come in when you're not fully aware yet of how your ego operates. So what it is that you can take home now here is this sort of first looking into, what our level of self-awareness, or how our level of self-awareness can serve us in increasing the accuracy of our perception, is really just the ability to observe your own channels of processing, your own use of your senses. Are you using all your senses, or are you just, falling into, the way that it feels, or the way, your mind interprets it, or, how your body feels at that moment. Yeah, so many of you, including myself, when you get sick, just physically sick, like a cold or whatever, your energy drops and your perception gets restricted, and you start feeling everything sort of caving in. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Anybody ever experienced that? Yeah, that you feel a little sick, maybe, you have a headache, or, you just feel really tired. There's so many of you feel really tired right now. Yeah, and then, as you go lower and lower into that physical state, your perception gets darker and darker and darker. And that takes a lot of training to unhook from that. Yeah, to unhook your perception that actually resides in, a much higher range. You have a much higher range of perceiving yourself and the world than just through your body. But at that moment, when the density of your body gets so strong, so heavy on you, okay, that you see the world just through your physical, your tactile, and maybe your kinesthetic channels, that you are no longer able to access your higher faculties, the senses that allow you to tune into, the higher perception that is in you. So that's what I want you to go home with, okay? That the way you perceive yourself and the world depends on the state that you're in. And for you to become more aware of the state that you're in should be your primary goal. Not to change it, not to judge it, none of that. To just simply become good at pinpointing where you're at. Because in that moment, you can prove to yourself that whatever choices or whatever options you can see at that given moment cannot be accurate, cannot be true, is limited. And I tell you why this is more important than any other self-healing technique that I could ever teach you. When you can pinpoint your state and you come in with your internalized insight that when you're in one of these ego states, you cannot fully see all options. And any choice that you would make in those states would merely reflect the limited perception that you have in that state. If you can admit that to yourself, if you can say, I'm in anger right now, and whatever it is that I'm seeing right now, whatever it is that I'm perceiving, that I'm believing, or that I think I must do, or what I perceive right now is tainted, it's filtered. Or when you're in pain, or when you're indulging in victimhood, or when you're in pride, when somebody hurt your pride, or attacked your standing, or whatever. Okay, if you can say to yourself honestly, I am in this state right now, I'm in an ego state, I am in pain, I am in fear, I am in anger, therefore my perception is flawed or filtered. In that moment, you are moving into truth, regardless of the content of what is going on. Janet, that's why I said to you, don't try to fix it right away. In the fixing, you are moving out of truth again. Whatever it is that you believe you must do or can do to fix it is still filtered. Give it some time. Just come to the honest inside where you're at, and that is what determines your perception right now. And then you can ask yourself, is that how I want to see the world? Is that how I want to see myself? No? All right, then let's not make a decision right now. Let's just not make a choice right now, because whatever it is that I think I can choose is limited. And then you can step into self-healing and say, let's work on moving into a higher state first. So we're going to investigate the mechanics of perception in our second workshop. Yeah, talk about, the order of things, talk about the different senses. I'm going to introduce the 12 senses of humans to you, and like how they interconnect. This will help with the intellectual understanding of that, and then we can talk through some of the examples, like of when you find yourself in a certain state of being, certain state of perception, how you can actually shift your state. But I already gave you the most powerful tool, and that is self-awareness. The moment you become aware of the state that you're in is the moment, and you admit it to yourself, is the moment where you move into truth. And that is an opening, that is an opportunity. The trick then is to stay in that truth state for as long as you can. And that requires you to refraining from trying to fix things. Okay, don't try to fix things. Instead, stay in truth and allow your perception to shift, which takes a little while. Yeah, and you will know that your perception has shifted because you will see a light at the end of the tunnel. You will see new options. You will see that you have more choices than you thought you had. Okay? Any questions? I think this is a good place to say goodbye. Yes, thank you guys. It's wonderful how all this is coming together. And I'm very happy with your guys' sharing. Yeah, and your level of self-reflection. This is exactly the kind of training, and don't be impatient with yourself. Yeah, to train yourself in this way that you can actually witness your own perception takes many, many lifetimes. So the fact that you can articulate these things and that you can, pinpoint your states is huge. It's huge. Now we just got to learn a few disciplines. Yeah, because there is this part in us that immediately wants to fix things, and that is what we need to withstand for a little bit, because we have to allow all that to internalize first. And the reason why we do this is because the mind thinks that it is in control. And that's then what we're going to talk about in part 2. How the mind is actually not in control. And that takes a little bit of time to process. Yeah, because we identify ourselves so much with our mind and our thinking that we often don't realize how we're not even in control of the way of thinking. Okay. Thank you, guys. It was very enjoyable, and I'm looking forward to our next part 2 in 2 or 3 weeks. I'm trying to do that sort of a 2-week rhythm, unless a month has, more weeks. So most likely in 3 weeks, yeah, if I see this right. Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.